Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolute rags to riches and ultimately pretty tragic story of Andrew Johnson. We're talking about a guy who climbed from the literal lowest rungs of American society straight to the highest office in the land, only to crash headfirst into one of the most severe constitutional crises our nation has ever seen.
It's a seriously fascinating historical mystery, isn't it? Like, how did he end up facing such a dramatic, totally unprecedented trial? Well, to figure that out, we have to look back at his astonishing beginnings. We really got to strip away the whole presidential seal for a second and just look at the man who started out with absolutely nothing.
All right, moving into Section 1, From Poverty to Politics, The Unlikely Ascent. Let's get into it.
Just imagine being born into poverty so deep that you actually have to teach yourself to read while working as a child apprentice. Crazy, right? But that was Johnson. With a massive help from his wife, Eliza, who really nurtured his education and his drive, he transformed a humble little tailor shop in Greenville, Tennessee, into a total political launchpad. From that exact shop, he became this huge spokesperson for working folks, eventually jumping into politics as a Greenville alderman.
His trajectory was literally meteoric. At just 16 years old, he fled his indenture, kicking off a lifelong scrap for independence. Fast forward to 1843, and he's won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, constantly hammering home the need for fairness and opportunity for everyday citizens. By 1853, boom, he's the governor of Tennessee, pushing hard for more schools for his community. And then, 1857, he steps into the U.S. Senate as a fiery, zero-compromise populist who loved to clash with the political elite.
Which brings us to Section 2, Loyalty and the Union, a firm stand in the South.
So, this intense local populism suddenly smacks right into the ultimate national crisis, secession. When the country fractured, Johnson had a massive choice to make, and he firmly stood for the Union. Now, his fierce unionism made him a huge, undeniable target in the South. He was in legitimate physical danger, for sure, but it also proved his unshakable loyalty to the federal government. Because he held his ground, he was actually appointed to oversee Tennessee during the war years, and he ruled with absolute toughness, totally determined to bring Union authority back to his home state.
Jump to 1864. The Civil War is raging, and Abraham Lincoln desperately needs to send a powerful message of unity to a completely fractured nation. He has to prove the country can actually heal. So what does he do? He puts a Southern Unionist on the ticket. Their unity ticket became the ultimate, shining symbol of national reconciliation.
Okay, Section 3, The Accidental President, a Nation in Grief.
Just weeks after his inauguration as vice president in March 1865, the absolute unimaginable happened. Following Lincoln's tragic assassination, Johnson assumed the presidency on April 15, 1865. The entire nation was reeling in immense, heavy grief, and suddenly Johnson, the former runaway tailor from Tennessee, was handed the monumental and frankly overwhelming historical burden of Reconstruction.
So let's get into Section 4, the Reconstruction Clash, Ideological Warfare.
You have to notice the stark, almost night and day ideological contrast here because it laid the groundwork for a massive political war. On one side, you've got Johnson. He favored extreme leniency toward the South and heavily relied on his own executive authority, which, deeply alarmed Northern Republicans. Then on the flip side, the radical Republicans in Congress were demanding much stronger protections for freedmen and firmly believed that Congress, not the president, should be leading the charge.
Naturally, the government descended into a total legislative deadlock. It basically became this bitter game of political ping-pong. Johnson would veto vital protections like the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and Congress would aggressively overturn them right back. He even went out of his way to urge states to reject the 14th Amendment, pretty much isolating himself entirely. He'd attack his opponents with incredibly harsh words, and his infamous swing around the circle speaking tour, that completely backfired on him.
And that brings us right to Section 5, the first impeachment, the boiling point. This path to a constitutional crisis happened exactly like falling dominoes. Step 1, persistent presidential vetoes, stalling all legislation. Step 2, Congress aggressively overturning those vetoes. Step 3, the ultimate trigger. Johnson directly defies Congress by firing Secretary of War Stanton, which culminates in Step 4, the House moves to pass articles of impeachment. In 1868, Andrew Johnson officially became the very first U.S. president to ever be impeached. So the Senate convenes to hear the charges in this deeply historic trial. And during this incredibly tense proceeding, the outcome of his entire presidency hung by just one number. 1. A single solitary vote. By that one vote, Johnson was actually acquitted. He survived removal from office, sure, but the country remained deeply divided and his personal reputation, it suffered lasting, permanent damage.
Finally, Section 6, a divisive legacy, the paradox of power.
Here is the great historical paradox of this whole situation. Despite Johnson's incredibly stubborn resistance, Reconstruction advanced anyway. Schools for freedmen grew rapidly across the South simply because Congress pushed forward its own policies. Ultimately, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments successfully passed, fundamentally reshaping the nation right around him. His successors basically ended up continuing the exact work he tried so hard to stall.
After leaving the presidency in 1869, he packed up and returned home to Tennessee. But get this, he wasn't done yet. He stayed active in local politics and actually sought a comeback, remarkably returning to the Senate in 1875, the ultimate comeback attempt. However, it was really brief. In July 1875, Johnson fell gravely ill and passed away at age 66. Buried right back in Greenville, Tennessee, he leaves behind a highly complex legacy. While Lincoln is universally revered, Johnson is often forgotten, yet he remains completely, totally central to the entire story of Reconstruction.
As we wrap up this explainer, we're really left with a cautionary tale. A runaway tailor rose to the absolute peak of power, only to nearly lose the whole shebang in a bitter partisan war. It kind of forces us to ask, when a nation is deeply, fundamentally fractured, does a successful leader need an iron fist or an open hand? And exactly how far should the balance of power bend before it totally breaks?